Most heroes wear medals. Some carry scars. But what about those who are simply left behind? For 10 years, Rex was more than just a German shepherd. He was a soldier, a warrior, a protector. He had saved countless lives on the battlefield, sniffed out explosives before they could detonate, and stood by his handler's side through the darkest nights. His loyalty was unmatched, his bravery unquestionable. Every mission he went on, every command he obeyed, was done with one purpose: to serve and protect. And he did it flawlessly. But when his service was over, everything changed. There was no grand farewell, no ceremony in his honor. The military had no more use for him, and the handler he had fought beside for years was reassigned. Instead of being placed in a loving home, Rex was sent to a cold, rusted chain in a forgotten corner of a shelter. Day after day, he waited, confused and abandoned. The same dog who had once saved lives was now treated as nothing more than an inconvenience. Then, one fateful day, something happened. A moment that changed everything. Someone finally took notice of the soldier who had been cast aside. And what followed was a story of loyalty, redemption, and the power of fate. One that would make the world question how we treat our bravest heroes when their duty is done. Stay with us as we uncover the truth about Rex, the military dog who was abandoned after a decade of service, and the incredible twist that changed his fate forever. The wind howled through the rusted chain-link fence, rattling it like a ghostly whisper in the dead of night. A dim, flickering street lamp barely illuminated the cracked pavement, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched toward the forgotten kennel like grasping fingers. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal, a far cry from the open fields and war zones where Rex had once thrived. He lay there, his matted fur barely providing warmth against the cold concrete floor. The once mighty German shepherd, a hero of the battlefield, now reduced to a forgotten relic, chained and left to stare at the same unchanging darkness every night. His ears twitched at every distant sound. A car backfiring, the scurry of a rat, the echo of barking dogs in the distance. But no footsteps came for him. No familiar voice called his name. Rex wasn't afraid of darkness, nor was he unfamiliar with loneliness. But this was something different. He was no longer a soldier, no longer needed, no longer wanted. As the night stretched on, a creeping sense of dread settled over him. His instincts, honed from years of military service, told him something was coming. Something was about to change. He could feel it in the air, in the way the wind carried an unfamiliar scent, in the distant shuffle of feet approaching the shelter. Was it salvation, or something worse? Rex wasn't just any dog, he was a soldier. For 10 long years, he had served alongside the brave men and women of the military, sniffing out explosives, tracking down threats, and saving lives in ways most people could never imagine. He had seen war up close, felt the heat of explosions, and heard the desperate cries of those caught in the crossfire. Through it all, he had remained steadfast, fearless, and loyal. But war had taken its toll. The last mission had been different. The explosion had come out of nowhere, a deafening blast that had sent shrapnel flying. Rex had thrown himself forward, his training kicking in, shielding his handler from the worst of it. When the dust settled, Rex was injured, his back leg torn and weakened. His handler, Sergeant Tom Bennett, had survived, thanks to Rex. But war had no time for the wounded. The military had deemed Rex unfit for service. Just like that, the once heroic German shepherd was retired, his years of sacrifice reduced to a simple transfer. His handler had fought to adopt him, but bureaucracy had its own rules. Rex was sent to a shelter for retired military dogs, a cold, overpopulated place where forgotten heroes were left to fade away. The shelter workers were indifferent. To them, Rex was just another aging dog, another mouth to feed. There was no room for sentimentality. He was placed in a kennel, chained for safety, and ignored. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. His muscles weakened from lack of exercise. His once bright eyes dulled with time. The soldier within him was still there, buried under layers of neglect, but no one cared enough to see it. But not everyone had forgotten him. Miles away, Sergeant Bennett had never stopped thinking about his partner. He had promised himself that he would find a way to bring Rex home. Bureaucracy had separated them, but he wasn't going to let it win. He had seen the way Rex had protected him, how he had risked everything without hesitation. That kind of loyalty deserved better than a cold, forgotten kennel. Bennett had been making calls, pushing paperwork, fighting through the red tape. And tonight, finally, he had found a lead. A name. A location. His heart pounded as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Rex had saved his life once. Now it was his turn to return the favor. Sergeant Tom Bennett gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he sped down the dark, winding road. The shelter's address was scrawled on a crumpled piece of paper on the passenger seat, but he had already memorized it. He had spent months fighting bureaucracy, making endless calls, and hearing the same frustrating answers. Rex had been reassigned. Rex was under government care. Rex was unavailable for adoption. But tonight, all of that changed. A former military officer had finally slipped him the information he needed. Rex wasn't at some high-security military facility. He had been dumped at an underfunded, overcrowded shelter, a place that barely had enough resources to care for ordinary strays, let alone a retired war hero. Tom's stomach twisted at the thought of his old partner locked away, forgotten. When he pulled up to the shelter's rusted gates, an eerie silence filled the air. The place looked abandoned. The metal sign hanging from the fence read, "Closed," in faded letters. But Tom wasn't about to turn back. He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on gravel, and approached the entrance. A dim security light flickered above the door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. After a few seconds, the door creaked open, revealing a disheveled man in his 50s, wearing a stained t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes were bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. "We're closed," the man grumbled, scratching his stubbled chin. "I need to see a dog," Tom said firmly. "A German shepherd named Rex. He was placed here months ago." The man scoffed. "We got a lot of dogs. Come back tomorrow." Tom planted his foot in the door before the man could shut it. "Listen, I don't have time for this. That dog isn't just any dog. He served in the military for 10 years. He saved lives. He saved mine. Where is he?" The shelter worker hesitated, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. Then, with a resigned sigh, he stepped aside. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." Tom's stomach clenched as he walked into the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with the stench of urine and unwashed fur. Rows of cages lined the walls, each filled with dogs in varying states of neglect. Some whimpered, others growled. And then he saw him. Rex was curled up in the corner of a filthy kennel, a heavy chain fastened around his neck. His once proud frame was thinner, his fur matted, his ears drooping. But it was his eyes that struck Tom the hardest, lifeless, hollow, nothing like the sharp, intelligent gaze he had known. Tom felt something break inside him. He dropped to his knees. "Rex," he called softly. The German shepherd didn't move. He just stared at the floor, as if he had forgotten what it was like to be called by name. Tom clenched his fists. "What the hell have you done to him?" he growled, turning to the shelter worker. The man shrugged. "He stopped eating. Won't respond to anyone. He's too far gone, man. He ain't got much time left." Tom's jaw tightened. "Get me the key to that cage." The man hesitated. "Look, I don't. Now." Something in Tom's voice made the man comply. He fumbled with a ring of keys, unlocking the cage with a reluctant sigh. Tom stepped inside, moving slowly. "Hey, buddy. It's me." Rex didn't react at first. But then, just as Tom reached out, the dog lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching. It was a flicker, small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Tom swallowed hard. "You remember me, don't you?" Rex blinked. Then, ever so weakly, his tail gave a single thump against the ground. That was all the confirmation Tom needed. He unlatched the chain from around Rex's neck, lifting the frail dog into his arms. He was lighter than Tom remembered, his ribs more pronounced beneath his fur. As he carried Rex out of the shelter, the worker called after him, You can't just take him. There's paperwork. Tom shot him a glare. Try and stop me. The man wisely said nothing. Tom placed Rex gently in the passenger seat of his car, draping his jacket over him. As he pulled away from the shelter, he reached over and stroked Rex's head. You're coming home, buddy, he whispered. I promise. For the first time in months, Rex let out a soft, contented sigh. As Tom drove through the empty streets, a sense of unease settled over him. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the rhythmic hum of his engine. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Rex's frail body. The dog barely moved, but every now and then, Tom could feel the faint rise and fall of his chest. A small reassurance that he was still there, still fighting. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the condition Rex was in, it was how easily the shelter worker had given him up. Tom had expected more resistance, some kind of legal pushback, but the man had folded too quickly, almost as if he was relieved to be rid of Rex. Why? Tom's fingers tightened around the wheel. Had Rex been abused? Had something happened at that shelter that the worker didn't want to admit? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Rex stirred suddenly, his body twitching as if caught in a nightmare. A low, whimpering growl escaped his throat. Tom glanced at him. Hey, it's okay, buddy. You're safe now. But Rex wasn't responding to his voice. His paws twitched, his breath quickened, and then his eyes snapped open. For the first time since Tom had found him, there was something in Rex's expression. Not recognition, not relief, fear. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from his throat. His ears flattened against his skull. His body tensed, his head whipping around as if searching for something in the dark corners of the car. Tom's heart pounded. Rex? The dog's eyes darted wildly, his nostrils flaring. Then, without warning, he let out a sharp bark, short, clipped, the kind of alert bark he used in the field when he sensed danger. Tom's instincts kicked in immediately. He pulled the car over, scanning the dark surroundings. There was nothing, no other cars, no figures in the shadows. Just an empty stretch of road under the glow of the streetlights. But Rex wouldn't calm down. He barked again, louder this time, shifting in his seat as if trying to get up despite his weakened state. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the windshield. Tom followed his gaze. There, just at the edge of the light, something moved. A dark shape, indistinct but definitely there, slipping behind a tree. Tom's breath hitched. He reached for the glove compartment, pulling out the small handgun he always kept there. Years in the military had taught him never to be unarmed. His voice was steady, but low. Stay here, Rex. The dog let out a soft whine, but his eyes remained locked on whatever was out there. Tom stepped out of the car, gun at the ready. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He took slow, measured steps toward the tree where he'd seen the movement. Silence. Then, a rustling sound. Tom spun, his finger hovering over the trigger. Nothing, just the wind shifting through the leaves. He took another step, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. Then he saw it. Near the base of the tree, something glinted in the faint light. He crouched down, reaching for it. A metal dog tag. His breath caught in his throat as he turned it over. The letters were scratched and worn, but he could still make them out. Rex, U.S. Military K-9. Serial No. 4487. Tom's grip tightened. He knew for a fact that when military dogs retired, their tags were removed. Rex's should have been long gone. So why was it here? And more importantly, who had left it? A sharp bark from the car made him spin around. Rex was at the window, his ears perked, his body trembling. His gaze was no longer focused on the tree. It was locked on something behind Tom. A chill ran down his spine. Slowly he turned. And in the darkness, just beyond the glow of the streetlights, a figure stood, watching him. Tom's grip on the gun tightened, his pulse roaring in his ears. The figure stood motionless in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. He couldn't make out any defining features, only the unsettling presence of someone watching. Rex let out a low, guttural growl, his hackles raised despite his frail condition. Tom had spent years in combat, but this was different. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a war zone. And yet, that same primal instinct kicked in. "Who's there?" Tom called out, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his bones. No response. He took a step forward, gun raised, every muscle in his body taut. I said, "Who's there?" Still nothing. Then the figure moved, not toward him but back, slowly, deliberately, melting further into the darkness. Tom's heart pounded. Whoever it was, they weren't here to talk. His military training took over. He surged forward, ready to confront whoever was lurking in the shadows. A sound, not from the figure, from behind him, the soft click of a gun being cocked. Tom froze. Cold realization swept over him like a tidal wave. He had walked right into it. "Drop it," a voice ordered. Low, rough, calculated. Tom exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He knew better than to make a sudden move. His grip loosened on his weapon, and he let it fall to the ground with a dull thud. Rex let out a sharp, warning bark, but Tom flicked his fingers slightly, his old signal to the dog to stay down. Rex whined but obeyed, though his body trembled with restrained energy. "Turn around." "Slow." Tom did as he was told, keeping his hands slightly raised. Two men, both dressed in dark clothing. One held a pistol aimed directly at Tom's chest. The other, the figure from the shadows, stepped closer. "Who are you?" Tom asked, keeping his voice even. The man with the gun smirked. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who walked right into our business." Tom's jaw clenched. "This isn't your business. This is about Rex. What the hell did you do to him?" At the mention of his name, Rex snarled. His body tensed like a coiled spring. The second man scoffed. "You really think we'd let some washed-up mutt walk away with all he knows? You're lucky we let him live this long." Tom's blood ran cold. They weren't just random thugs. They were the ones who had chained Rex up, abandoned him, left him to die. And if Rex knew something dangerous, something they were willing to kill for, then Tom knew he had to get them both out of here. Fast. Tom's gaze flickered to the streetlight above. A split-second calculation. His training kicking in. He moved. With a sharp pivot, he kicked out his leg, slamming into the hand holding the gun. A shot rang out, missing him by inches. Rex lunged, snarling with all the strength he had left. The German shepherd latched onto the second man's arm, dragging him down. The man yelled in pain, trying to shake Rex off, but the dog refused to let go. Tom didn't hesitate. He dove for his own gun, rolling to the side as another shot fired. This time, he wasn't the one unarmed. One precise shot. The gun flew out of the attacker's hand. The man shouted in pain, clutching his wrist as Tom sprang up, driving his fist into his jaw. The attacker crumpled, groaning. The second man finally wrenched himself free from Rex, stumbling backward. But before he could make a run for it, Tom had his weapon trained on him. "Don't," Tom warned, breath heavy. "Not unless you want to end up worse than Rex." The man's eyes flickered with hesitation, then fear. "Now you're gonna tell me exactly what you did to this dog. And why?" The man swallowed hard. "We were ordered to put him down. He knew too much. He'd been in too many classified operations. The brass didn't want to risk anything leaking, so they had us get rid of him." Tom's grip tightened on the gun. His chest burned with fury. Rex had given everything for his country, and this was how they repaid him? "You left him chained up to die." His voice was dangerously low. The man didn't answer. Tom exhaled sharply. "Get out of here. If I ever see you near this dog again, you won't be walking away." The two men hesitated, but the look in Tom's eyes made it clear he wasn't bluffing. Without another word, they turned and fled into the night. Silence settled over the empty street. Tom turned to Rex, who panted heavily but stood firm, eyes locked on Tom. Tom crouched beside him, running a hand gently over the dog's head. "You did good, buddy. It's over." Rex let out a soft huff, leaning into Tom's touch. But Tom knew this wasn't really over. If someone wanted Rex dead, they wouldn't stop here. And if the military had turned on one of its own, Tom would have to find out why. He glanced down at the old, worn dog tag in his hand. Rex was more than just a war dog. He was a soldier, and now he was family. Tom sat on the porch of his small cabin, staring out into the vast, open field beyond. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. Rex lay beside him, his breathing steady, his body finally at ease. For the first time in years, the dog wasn't chained, wasn't being ordered into battle, he was just free. Tom ran a hand over Rex's thick fur, feeling the warmth of the old soldier who had given everything for a country that had nearly discarded him. He thought about the countless missions, the dangers Rex had faced, the trust that had been forged between man and dog in the chaos of war. What does it say about a nation when it forgets its heroes? Tom had spent his life following orders, believing in duty, honor, sacrifice. But now, looking at Rex, scarred, worn, but still fighting, he realized that true loyalty wasn't to any institution. It was to the ones who stood by you when the world turned its back. The world had tried to forget Rex, but Tom wouldn't, because a soldier never leaves another behind. He exhaled deeply, leaning back against the wooden railing. "We made it, buddy," he murmured. Rex let out a soft huff, his tail thumping against the porch. Tom knew there were still unanswered questions. The people who had abandoned Rex weren't just going to disappear. But for now, in this quiet moment, it didn't matter. Rex wasn't just a war dog. He was a survivor, and no matter what came next, he would never be forgotten again. If the story moved you, don't let Rex's journey end here. Hit that like button to show your support for the unsung heroes who deserve better. What are your thoughts on Rex's fate? Should more be done for retired military dogs? Drop your opinions in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy gripping stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. We bring you powerful, emotional tales that keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear Rex's story, because no hero should ever be forgotten. Stay tuned for more incredible stories coming soon.